Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are in the world watching this. We have folks registered from literally every corner of the globe. This has been a very popular and actually at several points oversubscribed event. So thank you for joining us, whether you're watching this live or on demand, whatever time it is for you. Apologies if you had to try and register twice. We had a lot more interest in this, maybe than we were expecting, but maybe that was me being a little naive about just how much investment and passion and interest there is at the moment in the real quantifiable applications of AI and some of the foundations for those. So for anybody who happens to not know me, I'm Ben. I'm the editor-in-chief at the Interline. This session today is designed to pull on some of the threads that we started to put in place with this year's AI report, which came out earlier this summer. And what we're going to do today is I've got the privilege of being able to quiz three folks with very kind of different but complementary perspectives on the transition from AI as a wide open possibility space to AI as concrete applications for the enterprise. I'm going to introduce each of them in the beginning question that I ask of everybody, but at a very top level, we're joined by Craig Planson from Browzwear, Ognius Rimza from Browzwear, and by Ravi Rangan, who is the CTO at Centric Software. Just as a quick run of event, I'm going to ask these folks some questions that I have, which are based on the themes of the AI report and also on some of the general industry sentiment that we've captured over the few months since then. If you all would like to put some questions to them as well, we have a questions tab, and I will kind of try and triage and go through those at the end of the session, time permitting. If at any point there's something that you want to ask, just jot it down, put it in there, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to get to it later on. I think each of these folks' specialisms and perspectives and things will emerge organically, so you'll get a feel for who you might want to ask questions for. I'm going to start by asking each of us, everybody who's joined today, to tell me a little bit about yourself, what your day-to-day life looks like, what your role is, and specifically what you're working on at the minute. Craig, you're top left for me, so right. I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, Craig Planson, Chief Revenue Officer at Browzwear. I've been here about 1.5 years at this point, and yeah, my day is really revolves around helping our customers. We have a very complex set of customers that sit at the brand retail side and at the vendor side. And we're in a period of just enormous complexity and innovation. So a big part of what we're doing is really helping customers through this AI journey and really using our digital twin to create multi-use assets. How do they integrate around that? How do they build process? How do they collaborate between the brand and the vendors? So that's my big focus in helping our sales teams help customers worldwide, and look forward to the conversation here.
All right, amazing. Ognius, you are next because I'm going clockwise.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, my name is Ognius. Previously the founder and CTO of Lawland. We got acquired by Browzwear, I think roughly 3 months ago. But we had already at that point worked with Browzwear, I think, for 3 to 4 years. And at Lawland, what we did was create, hyper-realistic AI avatars specifically to replace, fashion photography. Supplement as well, like more 3D design to kind of basically how do you showcase products, that don't exist yet. There's no samples. How do you bring that to life? And now that we're at Browzwear, of course, we're integrating that into their, suites of tools, but also, of course, looking to the future. What else can designers benefit from? How can we save them time? What can we automate? How can we go from, basically going to digital 20 minutes instead of, taking a while. So that's me.
All right, amazing. Ravi, same question to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ravi Rangan, and I'm the CTO at Centric Software. So primarily focused on PLM and addressing processes across the life cycle, from planning all the way through commercialization and in-season selling. The background I have is sort of interesting in the sense that I've kind of had the privilege of working throughout my education and even my career in pretty much the same area in PLM and engineering information management in the early days in aerospace, automotive, and other industries, medical devices, and high tech. And then in the last 20 years, I've been at Centric. It's been in fast-moving consumer goods and fashion and the areas that we focus on. A lot of the work I do is really work across our product lines, which includes, planning and PLM and PXM or PIM, and then the in-season price optimization, and also a market intelligence tool, which is our way of understanding the invisible hand of trends in the market. And I think looking at it from this overarching view so that we can understand it as a model across the life cycle. So in a sense, I'm sort of privileged to work in a company that has all these products where we can abstract the understanding of how all the dots are connected between these various processes, which sort of presents, I think, for us a very unique way to start looking at AI and how it can be leveraged to connect all these dots, especially when they're very well formalized. And customers, like our customers, invest in their processes and their information, their business rules, and understanding all of that and incorporate it into our products. So sort of having that as an underpinning is very helpful and also exciting as we embark on this AI journey where you need to leverage that.
Cool. So I think we've got some really good, as I said, distinct and complementary perspectives on AI here. I want to start with another question for everybody. I'm going to do it clockwise again, starting with Craig, which is, in a general sense, how would you describe the current enterprise sentiment around AI? Because based on the conversations that I've had with sort of brand leaders, with folks in different perspectives, it seems like we're at a bit of a transitional point where generative AI in particular is being spoken about less as kind of a unique, transformational, wide open possibility horizon, and more like normal, discrete technology with a typical adoption and diffusion curve. And it also feels like maybe this is one area where the consumer market is perhaps ahead of the enterprise in terms of actual uptake of generative AI. Does that mirror what you're seeing? Craig, I'll go to you.
Yeah, for sure. For the most part, it does. I would say we're moving from curiosity to accountability. I see almost every organization we work with has some kind of board mandate to invest in AI. Budgets are being shifted to AI. Expectations and measurements and KPIs are being built around it. So I think they're started with a more experimental phase, but we're quickly moving into kind of some early failures that have led to progression forward. But, I would say some organizations are more strategic than others, but almost everybody's at least investigating it. And it's the fastest, I've been selling for a long time, and this is the fastest adoption of anything I've ever seen. I think there's no slowing this train down. So I don't know it's that far behind the consumer, to tell you the truth. I think it maybe isn't quite as quick, but this is at enterprise speed, full blast.
And do you think there's a reason, Craig, that we should be framing AI differently than the typical software adoption and diffusion curve? Is there something fundamentally unique about it, or can we judge it on that same basis?
I think it's fundamentally unique, just in the speed that you're able to achieve results, and just failing faster. I think it probably comes with a little bit more flexibility around what the expectations are going in, where you have maybe less of a defined outcome, which is probably what I see most, is that you don't exactly know what the end is, but you still need some kind of vision and strategic direction that it lines up with. But I do think it's a bit of a different approach.
Okay. And Agnes, same question to you. Where do you see this kind of diffusion curve playing out?
I think it's more like almost like two different curves. Of course, you have your consumers very much like picking up Gen AI and taking it everywhere, using it daily. And of course, then you have an enterprise side. You have companies that have been using AI, like let's say more general AI for the last 10 and 20 years. And they're taking a look at Gen AI as more of a, let's say, a new technique that they can add to their suite of tools that they use. But I think the consumer sentiment is driving a lot of these companies to move faster in that direction. But they're taking it a bit more, let's say, cautiously, because of course their end goal is slightly different than me trying to rewrite an email. But yeah, I think it's two different curves. You have the consumer, which is mainly consuming just Gen AI. I think they've never touched, let's say, traditional AI, that at least not knowingly. Of course, they've all received the Netflix recommendation, but of course, I think behind the scenes, a lot of people don't know that it's also AI. But now we're having consumers having hands-on access to these large language models and being able to prototype, work faster, be more efficient, which is also then putting it on the radar for enterprise. So yeah.
Cool. And Ravi, your perspective, what's your finger on the pulse when it comes to the enterprise sentiment around AI right now?
Yeah, I think, as I talk with customers, one of the things that I'm getting is there's a lot of, like, as Craig mentioned, there's a lot of focus on, everything has to have AI in it, even from a strategic standpoint. But when you really sit down and talk, and it's hard to get. I mean, first of all, the use cases are all over the map in terms of what the priority is. So there isn't, at least from my standpoint, it's not clear that when you really get down to the actual use case that one wants to do, it's not very clear in the enterprise setting. And the other part is, it's not very clear if, when you get an answer, if the answer is from the individual you're talking to, or if it's a rationalized perspective of the organization as a whole, where they've gone through a process and said, yep, these are the top AI use cases for us as a company, that we need to prioritize. So that, I think we need to sort of sift through that and really make sure that we understand what the priorities are. The diffusion curve, I think it is, if you look at recent ones like the Dynamo, I mean, not the recent ones, but if you look at the last 100 years, like the Dynamo, the internet, the smartphone, AI has definitely, taken a very accelerated pace in terms of investment, especially late. I think all of you have heard about the investment drive in AI and the amount of money going into it. One interesting statistic that I came across was, I think we're investing about 700 billion in 2025, likely to grow higher. The U.S. interstate system took 35 years to build, and they spent 300 billion. What we're investing in 1 year, adjusted for 2025 American, right? So I think the investment is enormous. The revenue is not as much. So it is early days for AI. And I think that, so I do think we have to proceed with some caution as well. I mean, there was a recent, Craig mentioned failures. There was a recent MIT followed up with the Harvard Business Review series of articles that emphasized almost 95% AI projects failing. And when you really sift through the details, you find some fundamental truths that, it's not something you put in at some top-down strategy. You have to really look at the use case in detail, ground it, and so on and so forth, grounded in your processes. So I do think some of the traditional approaches of prioritizing and being really thoughtful become important, and we need to separate the hype.
Yeah, and I actually want to ask you about that grounding, Ravi, because I think when we think about the real applications of AI, the thing that they all have in common, like you said, the surface is vast where people conceive that the value of AI can come from. The thing they all have in common is the need to be grounded in the stuff you mentioned. So enterprise data, business rules, standard operating procedures, and so on. From the vantage point that Centric has, there's a lot of those things that are under your umbrella. And I know that translates into having hundreds of what you refer to as like domain-specific objects that AI use cases might need to rely on. At the same time, though, there's also a potentially significant amount of data that lives outside the traditional PLM footprint, but that's also being eyed up by companies that are working on those sort of end-to-end, more comprehensive AI visions. What's your take on what it means to ground AI in the enterprise ecosystem as it stands now?
I think a lot of the grounding is based on obviously the model you have, the data you have to work with, how structured it is, and how much you could leverage. Because I think one way to, at least as I'm learning this, I won't call myself an expert, but I have been following it, and we do have a team working very closely on it. The agents that you're putting with the AI are trying to understand the data that you have. So if you have it structured, you get a much better shot at exploiting it. The nice thing that has happened over the years with the agent technology, with AI, is there are now interfaces like there's a thing called the Model Context Protocol, which is think of it as if I were to integrate in an enterprise system and accessing the data. If I don't understand the APIs or the mechanisms, I can get some consultation. Maybe it's not well documented. With MCP, the agent is trying to understand how to connect to different systems. So to the extent that these interfaces are very well documented, the agent has a much better chance of understanding it. And there's also mechanisms to pass context along. So if you're trying to do something with AI, to the extent that the data is in your system, the agent has a pretty good handle on getting it. And to the extent that you're fixing it against a very targeted use case, you probably are going to get much better accuracy. The nice thing that's happening with this MCP technology is the agent can also leverage MCP that may be in systems outside your immediate system. So a common use case for us is, yes, we do have a lot of data grounded in Centric, across all those processes I mentioned, but maybe there's a lot of stuff that is not in Centric. So how do you, in performing a job, you need the data in Centric, but you also may need, for example, standard operating procedures, which are not in my application, but are in some third-party system, maybe it's in Confluence in a database. So I think the fact that if they have an MCP, we have had some initial success in sort of reaching outside our boundary, understanding that, complementing it with what we need to do, and having the agent actually help you with the complement of data that is outside your system and within the system. So I think, and everything's going to come the same way. If you're getting a report aggregating across all systems, there's probably an agent that's doing that. So I think that is one enablement there of data that you don't control. The other thing is, I would say, if there's a very precise use case where you could leverage AI, then putting it in the context of that precision. For example, you're clicking a button on a product or a bill of material. So we know it's about the bill of material. We know it's about the line in the bill of material. And so that function where AI is involved is very precise. So it has a much better way of minimizing the probability problems with AI, right? That it's going to be less than one. So the accuracy is improved. Whereas if you just have it looming around as a chatbot in general, where it's expecting all kinds of questions like, what can I have for lunch tomorrow? Then its ability to, from an engineering standpoint, it's hard for us to test everything. Whereas in the first case, it's a lot easier for us to test, so the accuracy can be higher. So we're sort of looking at these paradigms of how to really go surgically laser focused versus having a very diffuse, open-ended way to chat. And the difference can help with that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And Craig, I've got a kind of related question to you, which I think when we talk about grounding in data, we're also talking about grounding in brand specificity. And I think that's something that a lot of folks agree on, is that AI applications need to be trained on brand specific data. And it's especially relevant when we think about Browzwear's wheelhouse. When you think about patterns, blocks, fits, technical development, the kind of things that are very closely aligned to not just product outcomes, but brand identity and brand IP. These are all things that 3D trades in, and they're all essential elements of building digital representations of real things. You've got a vision for what you refer to as 95% right first time. Tell me what it looks like to train models that everybody in an organization can trust to do something like that versus using kind of off-the-shelf tools where that trust is not there.
Yeah, well, a lot there. We very much believe that the data is the asset of the future. It'll end up on the balance sheet somewhere in the not too distant future. So that the visual assets are data assets as well. So you mentioned blocks and patterns and fabrics. All those things come together to build this trust to get to a first time right outcome. We believe having a first time right outcome and setting that benchmark standard at 95% is something to strive towards. And, we try to assess where customers are today and then how do we get them there? It's a bit of a journey at the end of the day. But it's really bringing together that proprietary brand specific data that's meaningful to them and then blending that with other data that's less relevant from the specificity perspective, but it's still relevant to the outcome. So a big part of what we do is we have a very, getting coordination between brands and retailers and their vendor community requires a whole bunch of trust here. And that requires precision and integration with other systems to bring all that together. That synchronization is difficult to do with just humans, that AI can begin to resolve some of that complex human handoff of the baton, some of that interaction. We're already seeing a ton of progress there, and we see customers continuing to move forward. But at the end of the day, this visual asset is a data asset. from what I see, it is probably the most fastest adopted thing ever. It's just, you can see it, you can feel it. And there's a lot of kind of misinterpretation of precision around those assets that we really spend a lot of time to get people to understand. Hey, if you want to get the first time right, you ultimately need the accuracy. You need to be able to bring all this data to one place and then be able to train and execute. So it's a journey, but we're seeing a ton of progress.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Agnes, I think the other element when we think about grounding AI in enterprises is the cultural side of things. So you spent several years, as you mentioned earlier, working on the generative side of AI as a way to either supplement traditional photography or in some cases, I guess, replace it. And I think it's fair to say that's still one of the main business cases that brands and retailers will make for adopting the generative AI, using it to reduce overheads and time spent either making 3D renders look photoreal or replacing physical photo shoots, whether they're for campaigns or PDP content. That's also one of the areas where I think AI is straying the closest to maybe creating some friction culturally, and maybe creating brand risk with consumers. What did you learn from your time there? What did you learn from that journey about what it looks like to ground AI applications, not just in business data, but in cultural attitudes as well?
Yeah, so I think what we saw, at Lawline was more, of course, people, like Craig mentioned, there's a top-down mandate now for, applying AI to your company. And when it comes to, overheads, photo shoots in general have a very high overhead. So they would come to us, of course, with that being the end goal. But then over time, as you would scope it out, of course, they also take into account the brand risk and let's say, applying AI directly to the consumer. But if you look at a lot of fashion brands, they also do, let's say, 2 photo shoots before they even do a PDP photo shoot. So when we're talking about replacing photo shoots, at least in our case, it was never really replacing on the PDP side. It was more, okay, we received the first samples, and then instead of having to photo shoot this on a real person, we're going to shoot it on a mannequin and then replace the mannequin with an AI avatar. Or, for B2B lookbooks, historically you had a lot of, let's say, sketches or just pictures of, clothing on the ground, or very quick, shabby, in my garage, like high volume, kind of, let's say, sample shoots. Can we make that better? Make it closer to what PDP, will have when it actually goes live? Can we, give our buyers a better, let's say, lookbook to look through and have better buying decisions when they're shopping? So I think it was a common entry point coming in from, let's say, chief marketing officers or the studio team at a fashion brand coming in saying, hey, we want to replace all photo shoots. And then taking a step back when you start to, weigh in, okay, well, our consumers like this, because there is risk involved in terms of, replacing your entire, let's say, collection with AI generated models. Plus, that's the one, I think, aspect where they actually invested a lot of money to optimize it. So they've put in, millions of euros or dollars into, buying automated photo booths, and kind of already optimizing that PDP shoot, let's say, step. I'm not saying that it's going to be like that forever. But I think, they haven't seen the full ROI on that investment yet. So I think they're usually starting like, let's say, 1 or 2 steps before that, by, focusing on, let's say, these less seen photo shoots and replacing those first, getting the confidence, hey, if this works, we can be a lot faster to go into market with these products.
Yeah, fine. I think in a lot of cases, AI is similar to existing technology in that if you find a use case that aligns with people's pain points, like the everyday departments, where are the challenges, then you start to see people being more receptive to the rollout of things like this because it actually addresses their everyday concerns. It's not, like you said, it's not a top-down push for this kind of thing. Ravi, I had a question for you, which is, you mentioned before about the huge value surface and all of the potential possibilities and the areas and the use cases for AI. We, in partnership with one of our events partners in North America at the end of last year, we did a forward-looking survey of about 200 brand and retail professionals. And the universal conclusion was everybody expects AI to deliver value, but where they expect it to deliver value is super diverse. It can be spread across the kinds of use cases that Agnes has described. It can be spread across the back-end use cases that we've already talked about. I know you've seen the same thing. So you've had proposals for, ideas come your way from AI that runs the gamut from concept development to like proper shelf level retail analytics. If you're talking to an enterprise customer or somebody in that enterprise level, how do they go about prioritizing those use cases? Is it a case of walking back from what should be possible with the technology, or is it a case of starting at the business process and working outwards? How do we prioritize what we can do with AI across this huge surface?
Yeah, I believe it's an intersection of the two, to be pragmatic. I mean, you can come in from a business process or from a business itself and say, oh, we need to focus on this particular use case because this has the most impact, but you have to obviously moderate that against the state of the art in the technology and what it can do. So there is that balancing act, and I think it is a ruthless analysis because you want to get it right and not fall into that 95-5 trap that we've seen surveys around. So we've actually converged on a methodology that we use. We call it AIM, and it's really the ability to look at actionability, the impactfulness, as well as the measurability. So the impactfulness you've spoken about, what is the value that I'm going to get out of this use case? I could have, when you do a workshop, you could identify 20 or 30 use cases that are very high impact for a customer, but then you have to moderate it against, okay, what's the actionability of that? And that includes what are the data assets you have, what is the quality of that, how reliable are they, how is it structured, and so on and so forth, plus the state of the art of the technology. With vision models, you've seen an evolution. It is moving at light speed, so you have to constantly recalibrate with it. And even with large language models, you've seen drastic improvements. And when you do combinations thereof, so you're for a very, sort of machine learning, predictive analytics type technology, which is still AI, or some knowledge engineering, which is still AI. How can you complement it, for example, with Gen AI? So you get the mixture of the three. So I think doing the actionability is a way to say, oh, this may be important, but you know what? The actionability isn't good with the assets I have, so I can't really pursue that. And then on the reversed side, to make sure to keep us honest, the measurability, which is, am I able to, set some targets, and am I able to achieve those results? So that you get that validation at the end. I think from one way to look at impact is, I think traditionally we've seen ROIs. There's an interesting analysis done by an economist at MIT who actually won the Nobel Prize last year. He specifically did this in AI, and he kind of split it up into task automation, task complementarity, which we can do today to some degree, and then deep automation, which probably gets into the autonomous agents realm, and then new tasks, which you can't even imagine what they are today in today's world. So, and then doing an ROI analysis and sort of framing that. The other thing that I think is important is opportunity cost. As we work with customers, we also ask the question, oh, okay, we're right at the edge. Maybe the technology isn't giving me what I want today, but maybe in 6 months, the way these models are going, maybe it'll be there, right? So you do have to make a judgment call. And it was interesting. We did one opportunity cost analysis with a customer, and so you get all the numbers. The cost of not pursuing this. Oh, I can't save all this money on samples. I can't save all this money on the design iterations and the speed. So that's your opportunity cost if you don't invest, for example, as a typical analysis. But I think the one thing I found, which was quite interesting, was came out of an analysis was brand irrelevance. So maybe, okay, things aren't perfect, but you got to somehow take some prediction of the technology trend and sort of take that risk. And then with that, make sure that you don't fall into the trap of the opportunity cost, missing the opportunity. Yeah.
Cool. It's an interesting decision-making matrix. I think that's useful. Craig, one of the reads on this, when you look at what AI is capable of, is there's a lot of applications and potential applications that are very focused at the creative explosion and expansion end of things, particularly when we're thinking about generative AI. And that's great, like wonderful to see. But on the other hand, the concern is that what you end up with if you focus on the huge number of applications and potential there is an over consolidation of ideas at one end of the product lifecycle. And that then gives you a very overextended early stage. So if you over index on AI for creative inspiration, for instance, what you end up with is a huge amount of inspiration that then hits a bottleneck when it goes into technical development. If you're generating more ideas than ever, but you're not materially improving your ability to develop them or to distinguish which ones you should develop, you're kind of creating a problem rather than easing one. How do you think enterprises should think about finding balance between seeing those possibilities and taking advantage of the places where AI is useful right now, but not doing it in a way that then overburdens the processes that come afterwards, or that puts too much confidence in what AI can actually do versus what needs to happen thereafter?
Yeah, well, we're certainly in that phase right now. So, we have brands telling us, that they have 10x the number of inspirations that they did a year ago. So this was the early adoption play of this whole thing. We're seeing that whole side of the equation be heavily commoditized. So while we have solutions to do that part, you're exactly right. That bottleneck is starting to show up when someone actually has to make this stuff and turn it into a real product that you can sell. So you can't just take that inspiration piece and then just send it to a vendor and hope that it works. So the big piece we're working on is, can we take that ideation asset and turn it into an actual asset that can be developed and produced in a much faster time frame? So that can take 4 hours a turn right now to do something like that. Can we turn that into minutes? And so we're looking at AI to do that. Our advice is to make sure you have your patterns in one place, that you can access all of these assets so that you can begin to train the models. That, at the end of the day, that bottleneck is going to exist. So can we at Browzwear also help organizations supercharge that craftsmanship piece, right? There's a shortage of people that understand the pattern making part of this. That lots of organizations rely entirely on their vendor community to do that, and then lose access to their intellectual property. So we believe it's a balance around that the vendors have a big role in this, but that the brands should own the assets. And you're exactly right. How do we speed up that middle part that exists and create an asset that is a derivative of the inspiration that can be produced, but then also turned into a multi-use asset for e-commerce and B2B samples and things like that? So we really think, being able to articulate ROI, we're seeing, like Agnes said too, like the early ROI is coming from reduced photo shoot costs, reduced shipping costs for B2B samples, lots of things where people can get a hard return on it. It's really kind of bringing all that together. But we're very, very committed and driven. Our top priority in North Star is to get that ideation to, pattern to digital twin instantly.
Yeah, it's a whole process, not just a matter of scaling up the beginning of the funnel and then hoping that just translates into greater throughput and greater accuracy as you go through it. That's something you have to be proactive about. Agnes, kind of related question to you, which I think is that if you look at AI as a big, wide open possibility space, I think what you end up with is putting applications and use cases into buckets that are too broad, or maybe challenges that are grouped into things that are too broad. What's your perspective on the difference and the balance maybe between general purpose models, the kind of things that we see with that people interact with on the consumer side, which are billed as being broadly capable of basically anything, and then smaller ones that are focused on specific tasks like search and classification? Should fashion be thinking more, let's roll into the big general purpose stuff, or should we be thinking more a case of matching size of the use case to the size of the model? Is there a balance between the two? What does that look like?
I think it's definitely a balance of the two. I think, like, for example, for a use case like ideation, you need a large general model to, give you a very broad range of possibilities of what you can generate and, ideate and get these, let's say, concepts. But when you get to the next phase, like, Craig mentioned, somebody has to produce this. So you have to link these two different, let's say, buckets with a bridge. And that bridge itself has to be quite, precise and, let's say, a smaller, more specific, more technical, and more accurate model, because you're converting something that's an idea into, a block. And how do you do that? Those models are what I call from like a different family in a way. These have to be specialized. They can't be general. Of course, you could take a general model and there's many technical techniques that you can apply to, make it more, let's say, for a specific use case. But that, comes with a lot of, let's say, technical work, in which case sometimes it might be better to not even use Gen AI in that scenario. It might be a traditional machine learning model, for example, like a standard, convolutional neural network for like a classification or, for search or for indexing. So basically bridging the gap of these two different, I would say, techniques. So it's definitely, I think, a balance of the two.
No. Okay, perfect. Ravi, just bringing us back to the key topic here, which is the enterprise side of applications for AI. It seems pretty clear from all the discussion we've had so far that it will be customers. In your case, it will be brands, retailers, and so on, who are the ones that really work to define the specific use cases for this. But when you're developing in partnership with big enterprise partners, for instance, that means hitting a really high bar for accuracy. Big multinational corporations are not known for their willingness to accept uncertainty. How do you think about approaching the task of either developing new AI features or enhancing existing features with AI in a way that hits that high bar that enterprises demand, but maybe also strikes the right balance between new development customization and kind of out-the-box configuration?
Oh, okay. It's a lot there. So let me make sure if I missed something, you might have to remind me. So I think in terms of the accuracy demands, you're absolutely right. I think, the interesting part of AI is, I think we're using it, our kids are using it, our parents are using it, but the enterprise is just now trying to figure out what its modalities should be to use AI. So it's almost a reverse osmosis compared to things like CAD, which came from the industries, which came from the government and research, to the enterprises before it came to the common person, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's kind of a reverse osmosis there. So enterprise definitely will tax it. So I think for us, one of the things with our methodology when we workshop these things with customers is also look at what I'll call the accuracy risk profile. So I think an interesting study was done by a group of Princeton researchers. I think they have this interesting book called AI Snake Oil, which actually is a whole bunch of AI apps, which more in the machine learning category in the early days that were released. And they caused great harm to the community. Medically, they were used in medical applications and judicial judgments of how long you go to prison for some kind of a crime or something, and they were just completely off in some cases. So we do need to be cognizant of the risk. So is it, how harmful can it be? What is the risk in terms of, and then what is the kind of accuracy? So I think through that you get a profile of the different processes. What is the level of accuracy you can tolerate through the life cycle? Maybe in some processes you are getting high level concepts that you have to basically elaborate and take it forward as another part of the process. So in those kinds of things, I think AI, you're not expecting very high accuracy, but you're refining it through a process that you're expecting to do. So for us, the human in the loop is a very fundamental part. We're not going off into autonomous agents right now. So I think the human in the loop is important. The fact that we have all this data and process and standard operating procedure and business rules invested in Centric that reflects the ethos of the organization is actually a big help in this area of accuracy, because now I can actually, use that as a filter to enhance the data, and also when I get a response back from my AI processes, I can put it back through that filter to make sure it is passing all the enterprise rules for it to be accepted. So I think that accuracy helps, which actually addresses a key thing that came out of some additional research that was happening with AI adoption, especially in enterprises, which is this concept of what is called a work slop, where, as I understand it, it's like if I'm doing some AI work and giving it to you and you're the decision maker, I might, cut the corners a little bit because the AI output looks really impressive. So I give it to you, and you are actually forced to do a lot of validation because you have to make the call. You are accountable. So they're actually finding 20 to 40% loss in productivity as you go through that work slop, friction. And in a way, the grounding that we have in the enterprise rules, I believe, sort of either minimizes or eliminates that work slop to a degree when you're collaborating between different, because you're always going through these business rules to assert the value, and you're always filtering it out so if I were to give you the work now, if I were to hand it over to you, I'm actually putting it in my PLM system, say, validating all those business rules that the enterprise needs. And when you're pulling it out and using it, you're also, your access rights and different things are getting validated. So I think in that sense, that grounding can help. And then in general, using that methodology to figure out what use case. In terms of, what we're doing right now, I think I'd classify our offerings into 3 buckets. One is we have a whole series of AI use cases. We've counted about 100 across the life cycle, across all our product lines, that we just offer out of the box with some configuration that you can tweak per policy. Some are machine learning, some are knowledge engineering type, and some are Gen AI. And so that's one spectrum. Those have been validated, qualified, and yeah, you do have to adapt to your process, but we've kind of gone through that element. The other part is we've got this very interesting, came up with this, I think, a very clever approach to say, well, a lot of customers, especially when we see the use cases coming out of our customer base, everyone's got a use case that is very different from the next person's. So it's not going to get satisfied by our 100 use cases. So how do we come up with a way that if they've implemented our tools, that we can actually, through configuration, infuse AI against the domain model that they have implemented, that they've invested. So that was, and the last one is really what we call co-innovation. So when there is a very strategic alignment with what a customer wants to do and what we are also interested in strategically, then we are, co-investing and working with the customer in a journey to develop something that once developed becomes out of the box and also is something we maintain and upgrade so the customer doesn't, which sort of supports one of the studies of the failures is that came out of these AI studies was they found that amongst those that worked well, 1/3 were done internally and 2/3 were done between the customer and a partner. So working with a partner has sort of a, if you go by those statistics, a 2:1 ratio of success than just trying to do it all on your own.
Yeah, no, perfect. That's a really good answer. Thank you. Craig, if we think about the amount of essential product data that 3D holds for AI purposes, and I think more generally, it seems like there's the potential to build a lot of AI use cases on top of that foundation. But that means making sure that that foundation is extended and integrated to serve those use cases. What does it mean from your point of view to really extend the value of 3D into these new spaces, the AI specific and AI adjacent, through the kind of partnerships and integrations that are growing out the tech ecosystem in general?
Yeah. So we believe we can't be everything to everybody, right? And PLM partnerships like with Robbie and Centric are critical. We've got a very close relationship there. And just overall, I look at it and say there's a difference between an open platform, open approach, and a plugin. So there's lots of plugins out there that serve a very tactical purpose. But as we venture into this world and all the unknowns that come with it and all the interoperability of the systems that go with that, you want to work with a partner that is willing to integrate and integrate systems that may be a threat to your current product mix. That, we kind of look at it and say, hey, while we'd love to have everything, if there's a better way to do it that's interfaces and we drive greater value together, that's the important outcome. Not everyone, I think, looks at it that way, but you need to make sure you're looking at that before you go into things. I think the world is a much more open world than ever. These closed systems just won't survive. And, ultimately just a high philosophy around an open approach is critical.
Cool. No, perfect. Thank you very much. Ognius, before I get to our last question, there's one thing I wanted to end on. So you talked a little bit about before the difference between generative AI and what we might call traditional AI. So I think it's completely possible for companies to extract a bunch of new value from data that they have on garment construction, for instance, using traditional machine learning rather than generative AI. Just walk us through what you see as maybe a couple of other use cases for more traditional machine learning. And generally, do you think the industry is maybe over-indexing on the generative use cases and ignoring some of the others?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at the 2 different techniques, I would say they all fall under the same umbrella. So, you have generative AI and like your traditional techniques. They're all, like they have, let's say, different amounts of data that they require, and the output might be slightly different and better for different use cases. But when you look at, like you say, garment data and more traditional stuff, it's first of all, you have to look at inference cost or training costs. So like if you look at traditional machine learning techniques. And if you do have that data that you built up, for 20, 30 years, just through standard operating, it's already labeled for you by basically just existing and being in your system, and somebody had to manually, let's say, input, the metadata and explain what that, let's say, image is, for example, or this garment pieces. You could also use that, let's say, with Gen AI techniques to, let's say, classify it or search it, or you can train a separate network, which is, let's say, more of a traditional AI network that does the same thing, but it will run 100 times cheaper, and it'll take you a day to train instead of taking, a lot, let's say, longer to train. So I think that's also, I wouldn't say it's a confusing part currently with AI. It's more of like you can achieve the same objective with both, let's say, techniques, but it's a lot easier to over-engineer or get stuck in, let's say, in this loop with Gen AI where you're 90% there, but then getting that 10%, let's say, refinement with these like large foundational models requires actually quite a lot of work, and might need, hiring, let's say, freelancers or experts in that manner to, like make it work. Whereas you might have been better off by just, training a simple neural network to classify the images for you based on the data that you've built up for 30 years. And, you could have gotten it done for a fraction of the cost. So I think that's kind of like the two differences, I think, if that answers it.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's a really useful way of separating those things. Finally, before we get to an audience question, I'm going to ask each of you the same one, which is, what do we think are the critical success factors when it comes to separating AI projects that are going to deliver value from the ones that don't? So Ravi talked about work slop, and I can't deny liking that's a fun term. It captures a very real concern, which is that more output, which is what a lot of AI promises, is expansion and acceleration, is not necessarily better output. What do we think it's going to take to separate quality from quantity in that area? And I'm going to do my clockwise from the top. So Craig, it's you first.
Yeah, I think there's going to be leaders and laggards in this space, right? The people that commit and realize there's some unknowns and have measurements that they're willing to adjust as they go is going to be critical around this. That, ultimately, it comes down to trust, though. If you can trust the data, you can make better and faster decisions. And you really have to build a culture, I think, of commitment, flexibility, and then trust. So that, and trust requires confidence, it requires completeness, it requires accuracy, all the things we talk about the enterprise. It's a journey, and I just tend to think you've got to be able to adjust as you go.
No. Okay. Ognius, same question to you. How do we distinguish quality from quantity in terms of AI output and applications?
Yeah, I think when it comes to I guess more, from my side, more on avoiding this. And of course, we're building, hundreds of, around, if you look at the whole space, there's hundreds of new tools coming out based on AI. And then this whole work slop thing is being introduced. I think it's also our responsibility when we design these systems, like Ravi mentioned, to have that human in loop, or have the ability for the user to either correct the inputs and that gets fed back into these, models, and they get more accurate over time. But kind of not hiding the fact that, they're not 100% accurate, having a little, let's say, feature built around that enables the user to, let's say, correct and make sure everything's correct. And of course, over time, that thing will get more accurate, or that model will get more accurate, to kind of like not hide the work slop, but kind of accept the fact that, with a lot of these new techniques, that's just an inherent, let's say, side effect until they get to, let's say, the final complete stage. Yeah.
Okay. And Ravi, same kind of question. How are we separating quality from the kind of quantity here?
Yeah. When you look at the decisions we make, I think we live in a fuzzy world, right? I mean, when you look at the data in black and white, you sort of believe that you give it a lot more credence than it came from some fuzzy analysis, and you put it in there and there's a precision. So some things have to be very precise. So for example, in the old days of CAD, there was precise geometry versus data that was not as precise. So, you couldn't tolerate any level of imprecision because things would blow up like a machine, like an NC machine tool navigating a geometry that's not continuous would blow up. So you have to really pay attention to precision. And but if you start to look at these use cases, for example, as we talk with customers, there are those where you need very precise geometry, for instance, for CAD. I'll just use that as an example because you are using it for other things, for measuring a lot of yield, maybe driving the cutting machines, etc. So there's a lot of that kind of precision you have to invest in. On the other hand, there's a level of CAD, or there's a level of graphic output that is used really for presentation and consumerism. And even there, it can vary from customers. For some of our customers in the luxury realm, when they look at some of the geometry, which to us looks fantastic. And actually, so I'll give you a real case. We're working with one customer who I would sort of say is Main Street, sort of fast fashion. And for them, that geometry, that image looks as good as what they're doing right now. We take that same image and give it that same maybe AI generated image, virtual try on or something, and give it to a customer in our luxury space. For them, they're starting to see all the mistakes, right? So I think that the context is important. And I think if you look at analyzing uncertainty, you sort of realize that probability is a very subjective thing. If I know certain things about the world, my assessment of probability of an event is different from if you know a totally different set of facts about the world, right? So we live in an uncertain world today anyway. So I think part of this also starts to say, a lot of us sort of take probability class in school, and we kind of have a little bit of image of what it is. But when we get into this world working with these probability engines, which is whether it's machine learning, AI, or even knowledge engineering, they're all probability engines. So there is a little bit of stuff they're going to give you that you have to validate. And some of it has to rely on your judgment. And that's going to vary between you and me. An output for me may look great, but you have a much better perspective of the thing, and you look at it and say, no, this is not correct, right? So we do have to get trained in that. And I think we just have to be pragmatic about balancing the human in the loop and say, yeah, it doesn't take the accountability off you. In fact, it puts more accountability on you, because you have to sift through these things.
Yes, the domain expert or the subject matter expert then is the filter and the determinant, I think, between a bunch of that. Thank you very much for your perspectives, everybody. We got time for one audience question, because we've gone a little bit over on these ones. I apologize, host prerogative. It's a common one, which is, how are organizations dealing with employee resistance to AI adoption? There are always people who will voice their concerns that jobs are in jeopardy. There are people who are worried when they're working with external vendors. There's resistance, there's discomfort around the use of AI. Does anybody want to take a stab at what it looks like to talk to the real end users, to talk to people whose roles will be impacted, transformed, elevated, however we want to approach it, by AI, and in a way that articulates the trust factor that we've talked about, the appropriateness factor that we've talked about, the grounding, everything else that builds the enterprise level reliability around AI. And this is an open one. Anybody can take a stab at this.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're actually working through one of these co-innovation projects with a customer, and this is precisely a dialogue we're having. It's interesting in terms of working through our AIM methodology, where the impact is getting into ROI as well as opportunity cost and assessing how one should pursue it. And we kind of laid down all kinds of cost savings, including labor efficiencies and improvement in quality of design, improvement in throughput. What was interesting, and I think it really depends on the customer and their philosophy, this customer took the viewpoint that we feel that by doing it through this flow that we're going to put AI in, our designs are going to be more on trend, and therefore we're going to put the improvement in the top line on sales by being on trend and not being able to mark down the product is actually gets us a higher value than a labor efficiency of, say, cutting the team from 6 to 2 or whatever. So they've actually, they're focusing on being on trend and underemphasizing and really saying, okay, I can do more with the same team rather than I can do what I can do with half the team, right? So that's kind of one case study that I can sort of share that I've actually been involved in the last month or so.
Okay, great. Craig, you were going to jump in on that one.
Yeah, just to kind of build on that, I would say, there's a shortage of people to do some of this work. And, if you can get X amount more productivity per person, everybody kind of wins here. So I think that's a big part of it. I think also just emotionally, I very much believe if the people that adopt AI are going to be able to outperform people that don't. It's just as simple as that in anything that anyone does. And I think people just need to understand and embrace that versus fighting it. There's no fighting this. It's the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah, and I think what we kind of talked about before when we talked about having subject matter experts and people who have the right discipline, the right grounding, and the right expertise to distinguish, quality from quantity. Fashion, no industry is drowning in subject matter experts. There aren't that many industries where talent is that level is overabundant. So I think if you are one of those folks, if you have a specialized discipline and you are able to do that curation and that distinguishing between quality and quantity, you're able to drive different use cases. That's a fairly secure position to be in.
Yeah. And if I could add, there's a really interesting quote I came across. Apparently, I don't know, I assume it's true, but it was from a reputed publication. But apparently, when the writing instrument was invented, Socrates was bemoaning the arrival of the writing instrument, and he expected that to be the death of mankind because we would not memorize things anymore. Right now, you got this writing instrument, so this whole verbal communication across generations and having everything committed to memory, that trait would be lost, and we as mankind would just evolve into, stupid people. So that has not happened, obviously, and since then we've had a lot of invention. So I think AI is another sort of technology that is one of adaptation, and humans have shown to be superbly adaptable over millennia. So I think it's just another one of those things. Yeah.
Fantastic. Good note to end us on. So from me, it's thank you very much to all of my speakers for joining today. Craig, Ravi, Onias, it's been a pleasure to be able to quiz you. Everybody who's joined this live, thank you. Everyone who's watching this on demand, thank you for your time. I'd encourage you all to read the AI report that the Interline put out earlier this summer. We will be doing another one of those in 2026, so stay tuned for that as well. For the time being, though, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a fun one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Bye.